All right. So welcome, everyone. My name is Tiana Mighty, and I work for Green Communities Canada. Thank you all for joining us today for From Floods to Flowers, the Magic of Rain Gardens. Joining me today is my colleague, Emily Amon, and we are also extremely happy to welcome Master Gardener Sean James with us today. So just a few housekeeping things. Hopefully you can hear me as I'm speaking right now. If not, please let us know in the chat. We will be keeping everyone's mic muted during the presentation just so we can cut out any background noise that may make it hard for everyone to hear the speaker. And we are also recording the webinar today so that it can be shared and viewed by those who couldn't attend in person. We've got a pretty full agenda this evening, so let's get started. So tonight's webinar will introduce you to some of the basic concepts of building your own rain garden. To start, I'm going to give a short introduction to Green Communities Canada, or GCC, for those who may not be familiar with who we are and what we do. We'll also discuss some stormwater basics and briefly overview the urban water cycle. I'm also excited to share the many benefits that rain gardens offer before moving on to some basic concepts for designing and building a rain garden. And then to finish the session, Sean will share some details on plant design and selection. And then we're going to move into a Q&A session where we will open the floor to any questions for Sean that you may have about rain gardens or plants. There's actually a few of you that submitted some questions in advance, so we're looking forward to answering those. Thank you for that. All right, let's get started. So Green Communities Canada, or GCC, has been leading community-based climate action movement since 1995. We work with a national network of environmental organizations to advance transformative, equitable, and lasting change. GCC has been working on stormwater-related projects since 2009. We offer many stormwater and green infrastructure programs such as Deep Pave Paradise, Rain Garden Masterclass, Rain Community Solutions, and Living Cities Canada, which you may or may not have heard of. Our award-winning Rain Community Solutions programs works with and supports municipalities, property owners, and community groups to manage rain where it falls, reduce flood risk, and better protect our water. Rain promotes three key messages: slow it down, soak it up, and keep it clean. Today's webinar is meant to act as a preview to our Rain Garden Masterclass. Rain Garden Masterclass is an online course that will provide certification for home gardeners, landscape professionals, and anyone else who wants to learn more about rain garden design, installation, and maintenance. This course is offered online. It's completely asynchronous, and during the course, you will receive support and mentoring from leading industry experts, including master gardeners and landscape designers as you build your first rain garden. We'll talk a little bit more about Rain Garden Masterclass at the end of the webinar. All right, so the natural water cycle. When rain falls in natural environments, it is infiltrated approximately 50% through the soil, and then it slowly discharges into local streams and waterways. Rainwater is typically fairly clean. A large percentage of this rain is evapotranspired by vegetation, around 40%. And only about 10% of rainwater becomes runoff after soils are fully saturated. However, in urban environments, the water cycle tends to look a little bit different. When the rain falls in urban environments, it is not infiltrated, as roofs, roads, paths, and other hard surfaces do not allow rain to drain. The stormwater will get hot, it picks up pollutants and litter, and it is discharged rapidly to local streams via gray infrastructure. This results in poor groundwater recharge, and about 55% of rain in urban environments ends up as runoff. So rain isn't going to stop anytime soon, hopefully, and it needs somewhere to go. Rain needs to drain. Runoff is a very serious and growing problem in Canada's urban areas and urban areas worldwide, causing flooding, erosion, and other damaging impacts. Climate change is just making these things worse by increasing the frequency of moderate to severe wet weather. Serious flooding is starting to become the new normal, so we need to move towards managing rain where it falls before it can run off. So what is a rain garden? Rain gardens are shallow, bowl-shaped garden beds where rainwater can pool and soak into the soil. They are a great method for managing stormwater on your property. They collect rainwater from the sky, but also what runs off of hard surfaces like roofs and pavements. All right, so before we dive more into the world of rain gardens, I'm going to put up a quick poll. There's a lot of information floating around about rain gardens, some true, some not so true. So I'm going to ask you, do you think that the statements are fact or fiction? We'll just take a few seconds to let everyone submit their answers. Don't worry, this is just for fun, and we will talk more about the results later on. So I'm just going to launch this poll here. And you should see the 4 questions up on the screen. I think just about everyone has answered. Perfect. So keep those answers locked in, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. All right, so the benefits of rain gardens. Rain gardens offer many benefits. Today, we're just going to touch on a few of them. The first benefit is that rain gardens reduce stormwater runoff. Like I said previously, runoff is a huge issue in urban environments. Rain gardens absorb the water before it reaches the storm drains. By slowing down the flow of the water and allowing it to infiltrate the soil, rain gardens help mitigate the risk of flooding and reduce the strain on infrastructure during heavy rainfall events. Rain gardens also help improve water quality. As rainwater flows through the garden, the soil and plant roots act as a natural filter, removing pollutants and sediments from the water. This helps to prevent harmful substances from reaching local water bodies like rivers, lakes, and streams, protecting aquatic ecosystems and preserving the water quality for both humans and wildlife, like our little raccoon friend here. Rain gardens also help enhance biodiversity. So rain gardens provide valuable habitats for a wide range of plant and animal species, thus enhancing biodiversity. When designed with native plants, rain gardens attract and support a diverse array of birds, butterflies, bees, and other pollinator species. And finally, rain gardens just look good. Rain gardens offer an opportunity to create attractive and sustainable outdoor spaces that enhance the overall beauty and value of a property. You can get really creative with plant species and colors to personalize your rain garden. Sean will be talking a little bit more about plant selection later on, and we'll answer any questions you have about that. So, rain garden design. The first step on deciding where to put your rain garden is to find out where the rain goes. So at first, you want to consider all the sources of water that may be from your roof, your porch, driveway, patio, or sidewalk, and capture what you can. The optimal location is one that is going to capture the most runoff before it reaches the pavement. We like to recommend that you go on a tour to downspout to see where rainwater flows after a rain event. This will help you figure out any problems that you could potentially solve with a rain garden. Some examples of problems that you may currently have on your property can include ice forming in the winter, water puddling near your foundation, or flooding water in your basement due to bad grading. A rain garden that is strategically placed can help alleviate some of these issues. So in general, there are a few basic rules for building rain gardens that you're going to want to follow. You will want to make sure that your rain garden is at least 10 feet away from the house, that there is a safe overflow for your rain garden, that the water pools 3 to 9 inches deep, no deeper, and that the rain garden is about 20 to 30% of the size of the roof that drains to it. You may notice that the first point here has an exclamation point next to it, and that's because it is the golden rule. So this is perhaps one of the most important rules when choosing a site for your rain garden. We want to make sure that your rain garden helps solve problems and doesn't create you any new ones. So your site should always be at least 10 feet away and downslope from any building with a foundation. So that's your or your neighbor's. All right, so maybe now you're kind of thinking and you have a perfect spot in mind, or maybe you are humming and hawing between a couple locations. So what makes the most sense? There are some additional things that you can consider when choosing a site. So again, water should always flow away from your house, but you're also going to want to consider if there is a path for the water to get to the garden. Is there enough space? What are the obstacles and hazards that may kind of be in that site area? And is there going to be an area for adequate emergency overflow? It is always a good idea to figure out potential obstacles before you start building. Some potential obstacles that you may run into are things like tree roots, utility lines, any walkways, or retaining walls. You want to make sure that you're going to avoid digging in an area that would cut off or damage the roots of any trees. You always want to make sure that you call before you dig and find out where any utility lines are. Many jurisdictions have a service that will come out and mark where your utilities are. In terms of walkways, there are some creative solutions that you can implement that will make them less of an obstacle. Past participants have done things such as piping it under a walkway so that you can have a rain garden on both sides of a sidewalk, or you can also go really creative and go overhead. And lastly, you should not put a rain garden above an existing retaining wall, as it could compromise the structural integrity of the wall and cause it to collapse, which we definitely do not want. All right, soil. So one of the things you'll want to know is the type of soil you have present on your site. Maybe you are living in a perfect world and you have 2 feet of loomy topsoil, but probably not. Underneath the topsoil, you get to see what your soil is really made of, but it is a lot more complicated than this. For a rain garden, we just want to know a few basic characteristics. Does your soil lean towards the clay side or the sandy side? To figure this out, you will want to do an infiltration test. So you can dig a hole on the proposed site about 8 to 10 inches deep, and you're going to want to fill that hole with water to saturate the soil and let it stand until all the water has drained into the soil. Once the water has drained, you'll want to refill the hole again with water. And then you're going to check the depth of the water with a ruler every hour for at least 3 hours and calculate how many millimeters of water have drained per hour. This will help you to determine how deep and large to make your rain garden. And basically, if the infiltration test is less than 3 hours, you typically might have sandy soil. If it is more than that, but less than 24 hours, you might have loamy soil. And if your time is more than that, from 24 hours to never, you might have clay soils. But Sean will talk a little bit more about soil later on. All right, so let's talk about the main elements of a rain garden. We have a great diagram here that shows the basic cross-section of a rain garden build. So you have your conveyance or your slope. That is how the water will get into the rain garden. You also have your rain garden bottom. This is where the water will pond during a rain event, and it is the wettest part of the garden. You will also have your side slopes, which are typically moist, but not as wet as the bottom. And also your berm, which kind of acts like your bathtub edge. It will surround the garden and keep the water in. Often the berm area is quite dry, which means you can pick totally different plant species for that area. And lastly, your overflow is where any excess water will go. Rain gardens are sized to capture most rain, but not a huge rain. You'll want to pick a spot where overflow goes to a safe place. So overflow is essential. As I said, the garden isn't designed to catch all the crazy big rains. It is designed to catch most of them, each one of which is pretty small. Most rain gardeners say that their rain gardens will overflow maybe twice a year. All the other times, the rain garden will catch all the rain. There are different ways to implement an overflow. It can just be a dip in the berm, or you can use a pipe or other solutions. The overflow will help you determine how deep your water pools, and you can move it up and down depending. All right. So now let's talk more about our fact and fiction and kind of go over some of the answers here. So I don't know if I can share the results. I think I can. Yes. So the majority of you answered fiction for this first one, that rain gardens breed mosquitoes, and that is true. Rain gardens do not breed mosquitoes. They are specifically designed to hold water for a short period of time, a maximum of 48 hours, which typically isn't long enough for any mosquitoes to breed. Very good. The second one, rain gardens require a lot of maintenance. Again, also fiction. Rain gardens don't require any more maintenance than your regular planting bed. A properly designed, located, and planted rain garden will need minimal maintenance. For the third one, rain gardens can't be planted in the shade. So rain gardens can definitely be planted in areas that don't have full sun. You're just going to want to make sure to select plants and plant species that are shade tolerant. And lastly, rain gardens are ponds. So rain gardens differ from ponds and other wetlands in the sense that they are dry most of the time. They don't store water for long periods of time, and they are not as deep. So hopefully this helped cleared up some of the common myths about rain gardens for you guys. All right. So before I pass it over to Sean, I just wanted to show some pictures of completed rain gardens by our previous Rain Garden Masterclass participants, which will hopefully give you some inspiration. The first rain garden was built in Trenton, and as you can see, it completely transformed the space and it looks absolutely beautiful. This next one was done in Montreal, and it helps soak up any runoff from the adjacent parking lot. And I just love how green this one is. And this last one in Toronto was done by a participant of last year's Rain Garden Masterclass. And as you can see, it's a lovely landscape feature now in this residential yard. So I hope these pictures have kind of started inspiring you of possibilities for building your own rain garden. And now I'm very pleased to welcome Master Gardener Sean James. Sean owns Sean James Consulting and Design. He was named by Landscape Ontario as 2020 and 2021's Garden Communicator of the Year, and gardening has been Sean's passion and profession for almost 40 years. Sean, thank you so much for joining us today. We already have a few questions that have been shared in advance for you to answer later, and also some questions in the chat, but I'm sure everyone would love to hear a little bit about plant selection and design.
Thanks, Tiana. Are you gonna harvest questions from the chat and then bring them back to me later, or should I address them? Okay, fine and deadly, because I see one there already, which is awesome. Yeah. I love when folks are engaged and ask questions. This is fantastic. This whole thing is fantastic, by the way. I love that people are engaged in this. We're making a difference. In fact, one of my regular rants and raves lately has been that I think gardeners deserve capes. I think gardeners don't give themselves enough credit. I think we have all of the tools to solve all of the problems in the world, from save the bees, save the monarchs, to carbon sequestration, the urban heat island effect, growing your own food, so food security. I think it's incredible what we can do, and I think we need to give ourselves more credit. And when you attend something like this, and I assume if you're here, you're checking out other things too, go out there and proselytize, spread the word. Don't be Canadian and sit in the corner and wait for people to notice you. Get out there and tell people how cool these things are. Excuse me. So, Goodness, I'm okay, really. So this is well, actually a bioretention cell, which is an engineered rain garden that we did in Mississauga. No sacrifice of beauty. That's something I'm very passionate about, is that no matter what your goal is in your garden, you're doing edible landscapes, whatever, you don't have to give up beauty. It's all about, first, texture. Flowers come and go. Broken record on this one. Flowers come and go. Texture will make or break your landscape. You want a combination of bold and feathery and sword-shaped, so grassy. This was just a little on my own garden. Actually, we didn't really have a proper traditional rain garden. We dealt with water in every other way you can, and there's many different ways of dealing with the rainwater. And if you have a bunch of different features in a row, we call that a treatment train. So you have a rain barrel and then a swale and then a rain garden, and then maybe that overflows to permeable paving or whatever. So this is in the lower right there. That's a great example of bold and feathery and sword shaped. That's going to look good right off the bat. Color, yes. Now we live in a great time as gardeners. We have a kaleidoscope of foliage colors available to us, and I think that's great. And I think we need to remember fall a lot more as well. You might be wondering, so if you see a little exclamation point there, that tells you that it's something that is invasive or potentially invasive. Why do I have a picture? I'm talking about color of what many people are calling nowadays ditch lilies and creeping bellflower. Two horrible plants, but they were between two driveways, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's terrible. But you know, they're not going anywhere, and they kind of look okay. Complementary colors and contrasting colors, so things that are opposite each other on the color wheel, things like color echo or monochromatic gardens. We have everything's in purples and blues. That can be very visually powerful. I will go by, if I can, a lot of my perennials and even shrubs in the fall, so that I can pick things by which specimen has the best fall color. It doesn't have to be all native. The more native, the better. You plant one native plant, you've done some great things. If it's all native, fabulous. And you can do that too and have it be quite beautiful. Your rain garden, this property here, the downspouts come in at the top, and then there's a long swale, and then it runs into a rain garden. For the first 90% of it, there's no plants in what does hold, capture, and infiltrate water. The plants are on either side. I love my native plants. Where I live right now is an extremely natural area. There's a necklace of ponds that runs down the spine of the property, and beautiful things like blue flag iris and great blue lobelia grow here. Yes, I know it's not blue, it's purple. I have an artist friend who's forever hassling me about blue versus purple in gardening. A lot of the plants that are native, people don't know that they're native. Potentilla, which has been renamed Tassifora, we fell out of love with it because we overused it in the 70s. And it's a great garden plant. The trick with rain garden plants is that you want things that stand spring flooding and summer drought, which is a smaller palette than usual. I'm a big fan of collecting plant palettes, and you'll see this is going to get sent out as a PDF to everyone later, because we frankly might not make it through the whole thing. And there are lists of plants that are for sand and clay and sun and shade and so on, because you absolutely can grow blue flag iris is a great shade tolerant rain garden plant. So is the revered cardinal flower. These are wonderful plants. So we just don't know, a lot of us don't know what plants are native and not. And then there's this whole idea of a nativar. So a nativar, back up, Sean, a cultivar is when this plant grows this way in the wild. So let's say swamp rose has a pink flower in the wild. Let's say you grew thousands of them, or maybe you're walking through the woods and you see one that's white. Okay, that's unusual. And maybe you're a gardener and you go, you know, if I take cuttings of that, I could call that Rosa palestris alba, white swamp rose. So that would be a nativar. So a cultivar of a native plant, and studies coming out of Montcuba Center in the States are showing that generally speaking, native versus nativar, it doesn't matter. It's got purple leaves, it's less appealing to larvae that might feed on it or the parents who lay the eggs there. If it's variegated foliage, so green and white, then it's more appealing, actually. Beyond that, the insects don't care. They're the beginning of the food chain, so we care about what insects want and don't. But these are all great plants for any garden. Rain garden or not, these are great plants. I have to get a word in about invasive species. We really don't want to be planting invasive species. If you want to know more about that, search Grow Me Instead Ontario. Many of the provinces have Grow Me Instead guides. And invasive aside, this is a Norway maple. Anyway, it's very difficult to garden under Norway maple. It casts a very dense shade and drought. This is ruby lace honey locust. Tough to find. Ask your garden center, make them, stay on them. This has burgundy leaves. It has dappled shade. It plays well with others. It fertilizes the plants around it. It's beautiful, and it gives you that same rich burgundy color. There are better plants. Again, environmentalism aside, there are better plants. You want to plant burning bush? I'd rather you didn't. There's a great plant called brilliant chokeberry. Terrible common name. Ugh, chokeberry. White flowers that are good for the bees. Spectacular. Better than burning bush. Red fall color. Red berries that start in August. It's with me tonight. Persist all the way through the winter, and then the birds feed on them in the spring. Beautiful, beautiful plant. So better choices. You already saw this picture. This is the horribly named sneezeweed. We really need to get some marketing people on the names of these plants. It doesn't cause allergies. They used to use it to make snuff. And people think goldenrod causes allergies. This is fireworks goldenrod. Neither of them do. Insect-borne pollen grain can't cause allergies. So what you're looking for, ideally, are fen plants. When you're choosing your plants, you want plants that tolerate a natural area that floods in the spring and dries out in the summer. The list is way bigger than that, but that's basically what you're looking for. A plant that in the wild tolerates spring flooding and summer drought. They're doing great things breeding plants now, or even just selecting them from the wild to make them more urban friendly. So sneezeweed, we did a garden at St. Luke's Church in Oakville. I thought it would be the best soil. It's the oldest church in Oakville. So soil, evolves the longer Mother Nature has a chance to work with it. No. They had dug a parking lot and lowered it, and it was basically subsoil. But I know Oakville, so I picked plants that suit clay soil. As people are mucking through it, trying to plant the poor things, they're saying, these plants aren't going to live in them. They'll live. These plants are chosen for this soil. We used to try and change the environment, the soil especially, to match the plants we wanted to plant. I want to plant rhododendrons. Okay, I've got to amend with peat moss. I have to do all these things. When you choose the plants to match the soil, you have soil that you don't have to work, that is probably inhospitable to weeds, and plants that will do very well in that soil. So it's less work in the long run. Nobody calls me as a landscape designer. Nobody calls me looking for something sort of Palace of Versailles. Everybody's first words are low maintenance. So that's the lens through which I view all of these things. I pick things that are low maintenance, so you don't have to work on it very much. Some of the new dwarf cultivars of sneezeweed, for instance, or Helen's flower, that sounds better, bloom twice. They bloom in mid to late July, and then again in the fall. Gorgeous plants and great pollinator magnets. A lot of the plants that we might choose for rain gardens do double duty. I don't know why, but we have the most beautiful plants in the world for wet areas and fens. So if you choose from that palette, you can have a great garden. It's gorgeous. That also feeds wildlife. Things like little devil ninebark. Perfect rain garden plant. That's another fen plant. A lot of the things that grow along riversides and ponds, riparian plants, are perfect rain garden candidates. Things like pickerel weed, monarch magnet. That's the fall color on cinnamon fern. A beautiful, beautiful plant. I like royal fern as well, but it's not quite as rain garden. If you got really good soil, and if it stays moist all the time, then royal fern is good. If you don't, then cinnamon fern is an excellent choice, but really neat. Again, really neat fall color. Don't forget about trees and don't forget about fall color. Rain gardens and trees really go well together. Now, a tree isn't going to help the rain garden do its job until the leaves fall out. So it may pond a little more in the springtime until leaves come out and all that water's evapotranspired away. So basically absorbed and sweat away. And I love larch. I have a larch right outside my window, and it's basically a forsythia tree. Fall comes and they turn bright, bright gold. Beautiful, beautiful plant, underrated. And there are dwarf varieties as well. There's one called Deborah Waxman. It's a little bun-shaped thing, perfect little plant for any garden. I realize our gardens are getting smaller. A rain garden can be whatever size you need it to be. Remember I said that, you plant one native plant, you've done some good. You put in a rain barrel and the world's tiniest rain garden, you've still done some good. And there's all sorts of wiggle room. There's hard, fast rules. You have to get it this far from the foundation. It's got to be gone in 24 to 48 hours because mosquitoes take 7 days to gestate. Well, gestate's the wrong word, to go from egg to adult. We don't want those things. There are ways to deal with lots of different things. This is a wonderful plant, actually two wonderful plants. The pale purple, I like to call it blue, but the pale purple is swamp aster, gorgeous. And you'll see that the botanical names are here as well, so that when you have the PDF of this, if you go to the nursery and you say, I want, unpronounceable, I want Symphyotrichum puniceus, that's what they'll give you. If you say I want swamp aster, they'll go, this is an aster. But you want these specific plants. Turtlehead, we have a native turtlehead, Calone glabra, white, food for a wonderful butterfly called the Baltimore checker spot, beautiful butterfly. It's good for all the turtleheads, are good for the muscly bumblebees. They're the only ones who can push their way through the flower. This is a plant that blooms in sun or shade, sand or clay, wet or dry. It is bulletproof and it's got great winter interest as well. The turtleheads may have a funny name, but they're a wonderful, wonderful garden plant. Marsh marigold. So I was a weird little kid. I'm a weird adult, but when I was 6 years old, I was already foraging in the forest around my house and harvesting marsh marigold leaves, which are, you cook them like spinach. They taste like spinach. They feel like spinach. Don't eat the flowers. A lot of things in nature, even the vegetables we might grow, scarlet runner beans, you got to cook them unless they're very young. So, some of these things require a little research, but this is a great plant for early spring color. And I've become a big fan of layering. So I'll plant marsh marigolds in amongst grasses or sedges in my rain gardens so that the marigolds come up in the spring, bloom, go dormant, the grasses come up and bloom over them. So I'm making double the bang for my buck space-wise. That's a really efficient way to make a garden look beautiful all year long, interplanting things. If you've got really good drainage, like a sandy loam, then you can plant Virginia bluebells and Camassia, which is Quamash, if you're out west. Wonderful plant, great food plant too. And we do have an Ontario native Camassia that's finally coming on the market. I'm a member of the Garden Writers Association, Garden Com, and we get in trouble a lot. We get yelled at a lot because we talk about these wonderful plants that are completely unavailable. And people get really frustrated because they go to the garden center all enthusiastic. If we didn't write about them, you wouldn't ask about them. If you didn't ask about them, garden centers wouldn't learn about them and bring them in. We have to talk about these new cool plants. There are garden centers popping up all over the place that cater to native plants. And the regular garden centers are starting to stock native plants because you go ask. So ask and dog with a bone, don't let go. Go back. Did you get those yet? No. Oh, go back in a month. Did you get those yet? All right, we'll get them. Stop. We make people be responsive and favor the independent garden centers. They're the ones who grow the cool stuff and bring the cool stuff in. If we don't deal with them, if we don't support them, then the box stores will only need to sell boxwood. The only reason they're bringing in anything cool is to compete with the independent garden centers. So support the crazy little garden centers run by crazy little gardeners. We need them desperately, and they're dropping like flies. Another great rain garden plant. Now this one is full sun. The marsh marigold stands quite a bit of shade, but switchgrass needs full sun. You have a shady rain garden, look at your sedges. If it's full sun and well-draining soil, then switchgrasses are brilliant and beautiful in the winter. I know nobody wants to talk about the W word, but in Canada, winter lasts a long damn time. Make sure your garden looks good in the winter too. It's really super important. Sun versus shade. I'm going to skip to the end on this slide. Plants can't read. They are much more broadly tolerant than we give them credit for. There is no ASPCA for plants. If you plant something and it doesn't do well in that location, nobody's going to come and arrest you. Try things. I'm learning all the time. Blue flag iris, I saw it growing on a green roof in St. Williams, Ontario. Full sun, blooming away, happy as a clam. So, give plants a chance. They can really surprise you. This picture here it's a pretty little garden. That's where I grew up. That is on the true north side of my house under sugar maple trees. That's a shady garden. It gets like this much morning sun. And yet, clematis and double flowering almond and all sorts of amazing things growing there. Make sure you're putting the right size plant in the right place. A lot of urban gardens, smaller gardens, you put in a Diablo 9 bark, that's it. You're done. It's full. It gets big. It's 12 feet by 12 feet. So do a little research. If it's cheap and cute in a pot, beware. Probably grows quickly. Now, there's ways that you can deal with this. You can prune off the lower stuff and make it go up over the landscape. You can cut it to the ground every couple of years, coppice it, and it will come back beautifully. Most multi-stem deciduous shrubs you can coppice, but that's a whole other rant. Try and plant the right size plant in the garden to begin with. Again, if you want low maintenance, that's an important thing. So learning your plants, and I have plant lists at the end. This is a very partial list. This is from A to C. That's it. And these are all rain garden tolerant plants. So that's a substantial list. And actually, it's gotten a lot bigger since I made this. But really, learning what plants are tolerant for rain gardens and pushing that envelope. Credit Valley Conservation hired me to show people how a rain garden could look, or an LID landscape, so low impact development, which is rain gardens and everything to do with hold and release. Hold the water on your property, soak it into the ground. So we took a few real properties, and that's a lovely little house, but look at how it could look with a rain garden. So we made, there's an infiltration trench under this pathway, permeable flagstone, rain barrels behind here. If the infiltration trench fills up, this is a berm which will capture the water and therefore keep it on the property and soak it into the ground. Xeriscaping, drought tolerant landscaping, is also part of LID. Keep the soil dry. Don't be pouring city water onto it so that when it rains, it's ready to soak up the next rainfall. And like I said, flowers come and go. Texture will make or break your landscape. So things like grasses and even cacti in the dry parts of the garden. That's our native opuntia, prickly pear. More grasses. I love my grasses. Things like blanket flower, purple comb flower. For the edges of the rain garden, these are all good things. You can get really creative with a rain garden. If at first you should succeed, try to hide your astonishment. I was driving down a road in Milton, and an old customer saw me and waved and then waved and then waved. And so I pull over. He takes me into the backyard. What did I say? Oh my gosh, this looks really good. Yeah, don't be surprised when your garden looks good. And there's not a lot of native in this garden, but it's still a good, very functional rain garden. The bright gold stuff is Bowles golden sedge. Hostas are actually really good in rain gardens. There's some, the guy right in the center at the top of the shot is one of my all-time, why didn't I label that? One of my all-time favorite rain garden plants. I learned it as sparkleberry, which I think is an awesome common name. Most people call it winterberry, which I think is boring. This is our native deciduous holly. And there's some great nativars out there. This is a perfect opportunity for nativars. And I'm not trying to push one or the other. But if you just go by the species, the way it grows in the wild, there are boy sparkleberries and girl sparkleberries, and nobody's sexing them. Nobody's trying to figure out which is which. So you got to buy a whole bunch to make sure that you have flowers. If you use nativars like Berry Poppins and the male, Mr. Poppins, you need one male for 5 females. And boring plant, all summer long, nothing. But when the leaves fall off, it's covered in red or orange or yellow, depending on the variety, berries. And in the springtime, the robins, cardinals, you name it, love the berries. If you see them eating them in the winter, there's probably a problem. It's medicinal. It is a type of holly that they make ipecac from, makes you throw up. But once winter processes them, then they're great in the spring. There's turtlehead in that picture. There's a really neat tree called bald cypress, which is a deciduous conifer, turns coppery amber in the fall and drops all its needles. Really, really cool plant. That's how good a rain garden can look. And this is functional. Before we did this, their property flooded well beyond the rain garden because every neighbor drained onto their property, and then it went nowhere from there. Once we made this, once the plant roots reached into the ground, made little holes, capillaries in the soil, even in wintertime, shockingly, research has shown, even in wintertime, rain gardens work really well after the first couple of years. So be patient. I plant trees for a living. I'm a patient man. This is nodding onion, a wonderful native that blooms late in the year. This is Morningstar sedge, which I love the name. The flowers look like the weapon. I look at them and all I can hear is whang, someone hitting someone with that plant. This is marsh milkweed, French vanilla. Not vanilla. It smells like French vanilla. And I'm a dorky insect kid. I was one of those weird little kids that collected insects. Really cool insects come to this, like great golden digger wasp and obviously monarchs and all sorts of things. A huge variety of pollinators and a huge variety of things feed on the leaves as well. And no sacrifice in beauty. This is actually in pure sand soil in Mississauga at Green Glade School. And I love the way this turned out. Really neat plants. This is our native, and I believe it's a species at risk. This is marshmallow, Hibiscus bashutos. We have some really cool nativars of that, all kinds of different ones every year. But dinner plate size flowers, really gorgeous plant. Medicinal also. It is a mucogen. So if you got lung issues, you take this and it helps you clear your lungs.
Sean, sorry to interrupt. I'm just looking at the time. I think it might be a good time to break.
Yeah,
and get into questions.
absolutely.
That's all right with you?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks so much.
If we absolutely, if we have time, we'll get back to, there's lots here, but this will be sent out. Tiana's going to send it out as a PDF to everybody. So you will see, I'm just going to really fast forward. There we go. So there are plants for clay soil, bioretention cells, which is sandy soil. Lots of different options for people to pick and choose from. I will stop sharing my screen. There we go. Oh, I should have showed you my pretty picture, my wallpaper. We had hooded mergansers here this past year in our pond, which was really cool. Okay.
All right.
What order do you want me to do the questions in? Are you going to give them to me and I'll answer them?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for all that information. That was great. And I'm looking forward to kind of reviewing that PDF after. So we have a few questions that came in advance. And the first one is actually about soil type. So you kind of touched briefly on this. So this registrant lives in PEI where the soil is mostly clay. Are there any differences in approaches when building a rain garden with that type of soil?
Two major things. You can't make it as deep because it holds water. Now, everybody's clay is a little different. I've got a whole YouTube video on doing a soil texture test. But heavy clay like PEI, Oakville, Mississauga, infiltrates water much slower. So generally speaking, if it's tight clay, like a heavy clay, then I would only make the rain garden maybe 4 to 6 inches deep, tops, depending on how quickly the water soaks in. The other thing is you've got to choose your plants more carefully, hence all the lists in the PDF. There are lots of plants. Everybody thinks, oh, I have clay soil, I can't garden. There are lots of plants that are brilliant for clay soil. These aren't rain garden plants, but just to kind of put it in perspective for you, wisteria and roses, two plants that people view as grumpy, love clay. Tons, most of the Ontario plants really, really, really do well in clay. Clay is just hard for us to dig in. That's why we don't like clay, but it's got lots of nutrients, it's got lots of water holding capacity, but because it infiltrates slower, you have to make it shallower.
Awesome. Thank you. And then the next one was about rain garden sizing. So you kind of talked a little bit about this. So what is the smallest a rain garden can be? Is it based off the amount of water that is running off?
Mostly, yeah. Also on the soil type to a degree. The general guideline is 20% of the surface area that runs into it. So if all you're doing is running your downspouts into it, you're supposed to make it 20% of that total roof area that drains into that garden. So this, your whole roof area is here. It's only this that drains into it. 20% of that is how big the rain garden should be. You know what? I'm not a big fan of rules. I might accept guidelines, even that's sketchy. I love finding ways around problems. And if all you can do is make a rain garden 3 feet by 3 feet, most of mine are sort of 6 by 6, 8 by 8, somewhere around there. But if you got 3 by 3, do it. Why not? If all you have is a low wet area, don't fill it in. Plant rain garden plants there because it's obviously an area that holds and infiltrates water. Do what you can do. You know that there are the rules, and then there's why turn down making a rain garden just because your property's small. You can do it. Just you've got to get it. And there's wiggle room on this too. That the general guideline is 3 meters, 10 feet ish. But I've put rain gardens in closer to a house by putting pond liner on the house side, so that it makes sure that the water goes that way. So, you know, there are ways around problems, and I've never looked at solving a problem with one solution. There are lots of little levers that you can pull on, put them all together, and then you'll make a great big difference.
All right. So
Yes, good point.
there were lots of other questions in the chat, so I'm just kind of going to go in order here. So
Sure.
Next was, do you know of any communities that have tried to add rain gardens into the setbacks of all properties in the community, similar to adding sidewalks in the setback spaces and city maintaining them?
I actually designed the plantings for a series of bioretention cells, which are just engineered rain gardens. They have under drains and so on, in the sunny side part of Ottawa. I know part of Mississauga has whole neighborhoods where there was big flooding issues, and they've created it. They get rid of the curb and gutter, and the water is guided into swales on either side of the driveway, where the water is held and infiltrated. A lot of communities, especially if they've been hit by a flood, they're backpedaling away from the curb and gutter system. Are there any that are doing it everywhere? No, not yet. The city engineers are very well, they're engineers. So they want proof, they want studies, they want to be able to put their name behind it. There are experiments all over the place. And the other side of the coin is that it is expensive to create those gardens. But beautiful, street crime goes down when there's urban gardens like boulevard gardens or median gardens. It's crazy what urban gardens can do. And I've seen the charts where there's a huge rain event, but what comes out of the end of the pipe, because those gardens that you're asking about have to have under drains to make sure that the water goes away. Once the soil is saturated, then it can go into the under drain, only a little bit of water. So huge rain event, and then a little bit comes out of the end of the pipe. Most 97% of rain events will be captured and soaked into the ground and evapotranspired away. I don't know if that actually answered the question or not, but it's as close as I think I can get.
All right. The next one that I see here is if the bottom of the rain garden should contain a different type of soil than the surrounding soil.
Okay, so you've hit on something that I'm really passionate about. In Ontario, when it rains a lot, and then it goes to being bone dry. Many rain garden guides will suggest that you amend the soil. I really feel strongly personally about planting the right plants for the soil instead of amending the soil. If you add in a bunch of organic matter and then the garden fills up with water and stays that way for a few days, maybe longer than it should, not because it's not draining away properly, but because you're getting rain after rain after rain, then it's going to deoxygenate. The bacteria that breaks down organic matter uses up oxygen to do so, and you'll get putrefaction of the water in the soil, and that can actually kill the plants. I'm working right now with Vineland Research and Innovation, which is a really cool organization, to create a rain garden for them. And their soil scientists went, yeah, that happens. So I personally feel that we shouldn't be amending the soil for rain gardens. It may capture more, but I think you have problems downstream, temporally speaking. Better to plant the plants that match the soil that you have, and less work and less expense. So that's my answer to that question.
And that answer actually knocked off another question that was in the chat. So words with one stone there. So that was great. One request to say the name of the study regarding the native versus native-are species for pollinator benefit again.
I can't name the study, but if you go search Mount Cuba Center, it's a botanical garden in the States that specializes in native plants. Very authoritative, and they do brilliant, sidebar, they do brilliant testing of various different plants. So there's a lot of varieties of plants called summer phlox paniculata. And they tested many different kinds under different circumstances. And there's a cultivar called Gina, Jeanna, 80% more pollinators. It's not even more spectacular. It's actually got smaller flowers, but for some reason, it's more attractive. The best of all the hydrangeas was Haas Halo, Haas. So just search Mount Cuba Center, and there's just loads of information there. I also listened to a podcast called In Defense of Plants. It's a bit deep into the pool, but I learn stuff all the time. If you're a gardener and you're bored, you're doing it wrong. There's new stuff to learn every day. At whatever stage of gardening you're at. Mount Cuba Center is doing really cool things for testing native versus native-are and all that jazz.
Very cool. And I think perfectly, actually, have one more question and then we'll start wrapping things up. So what is the best time of the year to install a rain garden?
So I would say fall in general. Forget rain gardens. Spring is no longer reliably moist. If you do a garden creation in the fall, mid-September, first of all, you're more likely to have it moist, and then it's easier to dig and plant. But then the plants, actually, their roots keep growing all winter long. We don't really think about that, but there's more available moisture until the snow flies. Then they keep growing all winter long. Before we can get the plants, before we can start working in the garden in the spring, the plants are already growing. So you've got like a good 2/3 of a year there where the plants are establishing. So when summer does hit, they've already got their roots in the ground. Yeah, ironically, you have to water rain gardens until they establish. The same with drought tolerant gardens. You got to look after them. They need 1 inch of water a week to get them established, and once a week, so that their roots go deep. The deeper the roots go, the better the plants will do.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sean. And thank you everyone for those questions in the chat. There were some very great questions and some very insightful answers. So we're approaching the end of our time together. So I'm just going to wrap things up here to send you all to enjoy the rest of your evening. So we are hoping that today's webinar helped you learn a little bit more about rain gardens, and now that you're itching to go out and build your own. So as I talked about before, GCC offers a Rain Garden Masterclass, and Rain Garden Masterclass will expand on today's learnings in more detail and provide you with everything you need to know to start building your own rain garden. So the lessons offered in the course will go more into depth on properly sizing your rain garden, explain more about picking a location, all about the construction, maintenance, how to select appropriate plants, and most importantly, how to get your shovels into the ground and start building. As a thank you for joining us today, we are offering you all a limited time discount for 20% off of the course fees for Rain Garden Masterclass. So please use promo code FLOODS2FLOWERS on Eventbrite to receive the discount. The discount will be live for 48 hours. We will also be sending you all a follow-up email with all of this information, the link to register to the course, the slides, and Sean's slides as well. Again, thank you all so much for joining us. I hope that it was very informative. I know that I personally learned some things today as well. For any more information that you want to learn about GCC and what we do, you can check out our website at greencommunitiescanada.org. And if you have any other questions about tonight's webinar or about the Rain Garden Masterclass, feel free to send me an email. And you can find Sean at various different places. So his website is seanjames-consulting.ca. And you can also find him on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at these handles here. And all his contact info will also be on those slides that are going to be circulated after this. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. It's been great. Good questions.
All right.
Well
see
done.
you.
See you all later.
Bye.
Take care. Ciao.